what to say about my colleague, John Lewis. Just two things. One, we, when our caucus meets and the Congress meets and they're having discussions, behind back doors, some people are just reading other things or checking their iPads or, picking their teeth or whatever. But I can tell you one thing. The minute that John Lewis steps up to talk, the place goes silent. Because of the moral authority that this man has, because of his experience and his courage, he is a spellbinder and speaks from a place that we can only begin to understand by seeing this film. To have been somebody who was beaten up, who was served time in jail, who helped to end segregation in the South. He is somebody that across the political spectrum is admired and listened to in the United States Congress. It is my honor to introduce my esteemed colleague, Representative John Lewis, to Boulder, Colorado.
I want to thank my friend and my colleague, my brother, Jared Polis, for inviting me to come here.
Here we are, we see you as a 19, 20-year-old in this film when you were coming down from Memphis. What was it that made you say, I have to go down and be part of this?
Well, I grew up in rural Alabama, about 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy, where Troy University is located, only 10 miles from home. As a child growing up, I saw segregation, racial discrimination. I tasted the bitter fruits of racism, and I didn't like it. I saw the signs that said white men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. You go downtown to the theater on a Saturday afternoon, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony. All of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. And I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why segregation? Why racial discrimination? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But when I heard about Rosa Parks, when I heard the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the old radio, it seemed like he was speaking directly to me, saying, John Robert Lewis, you too can do something. And then in 1957, at the age of 17, I met Rosa Parks. The next year, in 1958, at the age of 18, I met Martin Luther King Jr., and I was on my way. I started getting in trouble. When I went away to school, to Nashville, we started studying the philosophy of nonviolence, studying what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied Thoreau and civil disobedience. We studied what Martin Luther King Jr. was all about in Montgomery. And then we started sitting in. We had tests sit-in the fall of 1959. At two of the large department stores in Nashville, black and white college students. And when the students start sitting in on a regular basis in North Carolina, we start sitting in. And the first time I got arrested was February 27, 1960. I felt so free. I felt liberated. I felt like I crossed over. And when the word went out that the Freedom Ride was going to take place, I applied to go. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell anyone in my family. They didn't know I was on the Freedom Ride until I had been beaten and later got arrested.
And was that because they would have not approved of you going?
Oh, my mother wrote me a letter during the sit-ins and said, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get in trouble, you need to get out of that mess. And I wrote her a letter back. I think I tried to play the role of Martin Luther by saying I've acted according to the dictates of my conscience, my conviction. I couldn't do anything less. I don't think she knew what I was writing or talking about.
What was it in you, whether it was in you and everyone else or just you, but I asked you to speak at least from your perspective. What was it that was in you that allowed you to be nonviolent in a violent situation? Where did that strength come from?
Well, we have been trained to accept nonviolence, not simply as a technique or as a tactic, but as a way of life, as a way of living. When you accept nonviolence simply as a technique or as a tactic, it becomes like a faucet. You can turn it on and turn it off. You can say, well, I'm going to love Mary today and dislike Sue tomorrow. Well, I'm going to love Ron today and dislike Bob tomorrow. So just love everybody. Dr. King used to joke sometime, and he would say to some of us, just love the hell out of everybody. Just love them. But, you know, I was beaten a few times during the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride, the march from Selma to Montgomery. But I came to that place where I lost all sense of fear. When we went on the Freedom Ride, especially the second leg of the ride, we were prepared to die. Because we believed in something that was so right, so good, and so necessary.
I wonder if you could just talk about any type of similarities that you see that still happen today. That's that same type of movement, care, concern, responsibility of young people today and what they're doing to help make America what it should be.
I'm so proud and pleased to see the action, the involvement of young people. In 1980, 2008, a few days ago, last weekend, I had an opportunity to speak to Teach for America Summit. And there was more than 10,000 teachers, young people, teaching in some of the most difficult areas of our country. These are young people. They're saying that I can do something. I can give something back. The same way that more than 1,000 young people, and probably some from here, I know people came from Colorado. I know they came from the university, came to Mississippi in 1964 to teach people how to pass the so-called literacy test, to become registered voters. Back in 1964, in the state of Mississippi, that state had a black voting age population of more than 450,000, and only about 16,000 were registered to vote. There was one county in Alabama in 1965, Lowndes County, between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American, but not a single registered African American voter in the county. And it was the young people, young students, black and white, that came south. And during the summer of '64, as you stated before, 3 young men that I knew, Andy Goodman, Mickey Sherner, white, James Shaney, African American, went out to investigate the burning of an African American church, because many of the churches were used for voter registration workshops, of freedom schools. They were detained by the sheriff, arrested, later turned over to the Klan, but they were beaten, shot, and killed. I tell young people, young students all the time, that these 3 young men didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East. They didn't die in Africa or Eastern Europe or Central or South America. They died right here in our own country, trying to get all of our citizens to become participants in the democratic process. And we have to tell this story so generation would never, ever forget.
The issues of nonviolence and the issues of tolerance continue today, whether it's nonviolence of what's happening in Egypt, or what just happened in Egypt, the idea of tolerance and intolerance of the immigration reform. That's a very important issue out here in the West, as I'm sure you know. Can you just sort of talk about what those issues mean to you today when you see this happening not just in our country but around the world?
I'm gratified, I'm moved. Sometimes I feel like I should be there. It's like the feeling they're my people, and I should be marching and walking with them. And you move to speak up, you move to say something. The people in Egypt, young people, people not so young, just rose up. They used their feet Dr. King used to say there's nothing more powerful than determined people marching with their feet. 18 days, a nonviolent revolution. Took us longer during the sit-in, took us longer during the bus boycott. But the message and the philosophy of nonviolence is still there. It's not obsolete. We can still use it to change and bring about progress for all humankind. When I hear people trying to put someone down because of their last name, or maybe the language, and call people illegal, there's no such thing as an illegal human being. I fought too long and too hard against discrimination based on race and color. Not to be able to stand up and speak out on discrimination based on sexual orientation, or based on what part of the world that you might come from. We all live in the same house. We live together. Gandhi put it one way. He said it's non-violence and non-existent. Dr. King said that we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we'll perish as fools.
After so much social progress, why is there still a large economic gap with a majority of minor cultures below poverty line, and how can we change this?
Now, some people ask me from time to time, especially members of the press, whether the election of Barack Obama is the fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. And I said, no, it's only a down payment. We all have work to do. There's still too many people left out and left behind in America. They're black, they're white, they're Hispanic, they're Asian American, and Native American. We got to go back to what Martin Luther King Jr., where Dr. King and Robert Kennedy left off in 1968, and put back on the American agenda the problem of the poor, the homeless. That's what we got to do.
I look around today at my generation and I see just apathy and a real lack of passion. And going off of what you two were saying, that there's power in the youth, what suggestions or inspiration might you have for us? Or what would be today's equivalent? What can I do to get on the bus and to be a freedom rider today? What can we do?
Well, in a classroom or in school or in the neighborhood or community, we see people putting people down. The bullying. You know, it's not just someone slapping someone. Words can be very violent. Why are we so mean to each other? Why can't we just say thank you and say excuse me? Or say to a teacher, you're doing a good job. When I'm in Washington, back in Atlanta, coming through the airport, I see a soldier, I would say thank you for your service. They're wearing a uniform. I see a police officer, thank you for your service. I see the Capitol Hill Police, thank you for your service. But we see hundreds and thousands of people doing unbelievable work, but they're without a uniform. So they can't identify a teacher. And just say, thank you. Excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it going out of style? Is it old-fashioned? To just be human.
Thank you for your service.